Why buy an RTX 4060 Ti when you can get one of these for the exact same price on the used market? For the same price, you can buy a brand new RTX 4060 Ti, which is not a great value graphics card. Anyways, you can get an RTX 3080 for the exact same price or thereabouts. Many people will argue that the 3080 is a much better value graphics card and it's much more powerful. Well, that's really not up for debate. It is a much more powerful graphics card. And together today, we're going to find out why this is the case. And to do so, we've tested out both 1080p and 1440p, as these are kind of like the target resolutions for the 4060 Ti, and I'm going to be working on 4K in a dedicated video with the RTX 3080, so make sure you stay subscribed so you don't miss that. All testing has been done in my main PC, which has a 13700K, 64GB of DDR5 memory clocked at 6000 mega transfers per second, and a 2TB NVMe Gen 4 SSD. All of the specs are linked in the description with my Amazon affiliate links. If you want to pick any of them up, you do help out the channel, as I do get a small kickback from them. Anyways, back to the 3080. It's been slightly tuned as I run this with a undervolt. It's clocked at around 1860 megahertz, I'd like to say. You'll see it in the overlay anyway. And it's also got an extra 1000 megahertz on the memory, giving it a bit of a performance boost in games. As for the NVIDIA driver, I can't really remember it off the top of my head, but it will be listed on the screen, and it was the latest one at the time of testing. Anyways, without any more talking, let's see how it gets on. Starting off with the best redemption story in gaming history with Cyberpunk 2077, and what I can say is both resolutions are very playable at rasterized ultra settings. Over 100 FPS at 1080p is more than enough for basically everyone in a single player game, and 86 at 1440p is definitely a nice thing to see, I'd like to say. Also, the frame pacing at both resolutions is totally fine. You won't be having any problems there either. Spider-Man's a game I had to shoehorn in because I was trying to test Black Myth Wukong, but the resolution scaling in that benchmark just doesn't make sense, so this game will have to do for now. And yeah, performance on the 3080 is very nice. 1080p is showing some signs of being CPU bound, as it's not that much faster than 1440p. But what I can say is 1440p is definitely the sweet spot in this game, because you're not losing much FPS to 1080p and you're getting a much sharper image. So this is where I'd definitely set the 3080 to with rasterization. God of War Ragnarok's a game I've played through recently, and I've got to say it's an absolutely brilliant title with great optimization as well, because on the ultra preset at both 1080p and 1440p, the 3080 is having absolutely brilliant performance. Over 100 FPS at full HD, and just under that with 1440p means I don't think you're going to be having any problems in this, and there were also no VRAM related problems either. And this is what we want to see with PC gaming: optimized PC ports. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is an absolute massive success, and the 3080 sees another success in this game. 182 FPS at 1080p with a somewhat mediocre 1% low, and the same thing continues at 1440p. It's just not as bad. However, the 3080 is playable at both resolutions. Personally, I like to set this to the low preset with high textures and enable DLSS at 1440p, and that nets me a whole heap of performance. And this is the great thing about PC gaming: you have a lot of settings open to you. One thing I can say though is the 3080 puts up a decent fight in this game. Fortnite was never going to be an issue on the 3080, as you have absolutely, well, competitive frame rates across both resolutions today. So if you had a 1080p 360Hz monitor or a 1440p 240Hz, you're not going to be having any problems here. This was on the medium preset, mind you, as I wanted it to be a bit more GPU bound compared to CPU bound. But if you're an ultra competitive gamer, there's always the performance API and lower settings as well if you needed more frames. Star Wars Jedi Survivor seems to be a bit better with the average frame rates now, but as we see with Unreal Engine games, the 1% lows are pretty lackluster, as across both the resolutions today, we do observe quite a bit of stutter in this game, so that's not particularly brilliant. But I do have to say, it does seem to have improved the average frame rate, so hats off to the developers a bit. just get on top of those 1% lows, and yeah, we'll be having a lot more fun in Jedi Survivor. What I can say for the 3080 though is doing a decent job at both resolutions today. Just like Jedi Survivor, Hogwarts Legacy does seem to struggle with the 1% lows, but the averages are looking quite good across both resolutions. Yes, it's not as bad as the Star Wars game, but I think we'd like to see a little improvement in this area here. But yeah, one thing I can say though is the 3080 performs very decently in this title, and I don't think you're going to be having any problems at either resolution. Forza Motorsport is up next, and at both resolutions, yeah, you're not going to be having any troubles at all, and the 1% lows are looking very strong in this game, so the frame delivery is very consistent. This is very important for racing games, as if you get stutters while you're trying to turn into a corner, it could absolutely throw you off and ruin your lap time, so this is a very good thing to see. And on the Ultra preset, Forza Motorsport looks absolutely brilliant, so you're not going to be having any problems with a 3080 in this title. Another game that looks brilliant is The Witcher 3 on the Ultra preset. Both 1080p and 1440p see absolutely, well, just playable frame rates. You're not going to be having any problems here. 90 FPS at 1440p and over 130 at 1080p, no problems there. The 1% lows could probably see a bit of an improvement at full HD, but this could be a CPU bottleneck problem, as Novigrad is very CPU demanding, so that has to be known. But when we're a bit more GPU bound at 1440p, the 1% lows aren't so much of a problem. Hold your horses, we're not quite done yet, as the RTX 3080 is an RTX graphics card. We need to do some ray tracing, and for the first time in what feels like quite a while, we can say ray tracing is a viable thing. Because in Cyberpunk at 1080p, you're still way above 60 FPS. 1440p, yeah, 48 FPS for the average frame rate isn't particularly brilliant. To be honest, I'll just put on DLSS and do some settings tweaking, and you can easily get this above 60. I know, I've personally done it. And by the way, ray tracing looks really good in Cyberpunk, and it's definitely that one game I recommend enabling it in, if you've got the performance to spare, that is. Speaking of the performance to spare, Spider-Man has plenty of headroom for ray tracing, as we're getting way above 60 FPS in both resolutions, and the 1% lows are, well, still above 60 FPS as well. Yes, 1080p does seem to be a bit CPU bound, as ray tracing does add a bit of load onto the processor, and this is what we can see here, as 1440p ray tracing definitely does seem like the sweet spot, and I certainly recommend enabling ray tracing on a 3080 in this game. One thing that's really surprising is Star Wars Jedi Survivor got above 60 FPS at both resolutions today with ray tracing enabled, which is not something I thought I was going to be expecting, but that's kind of where the good news ends, as the 1% lows and the frame delivery are absolutely all over the place. So ray tracing is viable in Jedi Survivor as long as you can stomach those 1% lows, because they're not brilliant. Hogwarts Legacy with ray tracing looks pretty good if you ask me, but what's also good is the performance, because it just ducked 90 FPS at 1080p and it got a nice 69 at 1440p, and this says to us that Hogwarts Legacy is very playable with ray tracing at both of these resolutions, and I'll probably recommend enabling it as you've got the headroom to do so. And then there's The Witcher 3. Ray tracing here is, well, it's doable at both resolutions yet again. We're cutting it close at 1440p with an average frame rate of 60 FPS, but it's an RTX card, so you can just whack on DLSS and you won't lose any quality, let's be honest. Well, nothing noticeable at least. And then 1080p, the performance is fine here as well. It's definitely a shame that the next Witcher game won't be using the Red engine, because I think this is an absolutely brilliant engine. Ray tracing responds very well. It's quite optimized, unlike some other engines, so that is a big shame. One thing I can say though, The Witcher 3, it's pretty good on a 3080. So yes, I think we can all agree the RTX 3080 is an incredibly powerful graphics card, and it's probably more powerful than what most gamers would need out there, probably myself included in that. But from what we can see today, 1440p is definitely the sweet spot resolution for this, as even 1080p was being well, the 1080p wasn't being held back, but the 3080 was being held back by the 13700K today, which is no slouch of a CPU, mind you. Also, this is something we don't really say that much on the channel, but ray tracing is very viable on a graphics card like this, especially in CD Projekt Red games, as these tend to be quite well integrated with ray tracing. So props to CDPR for actually making substantial ray tracing, which is worth the performance hit. But what we can say is this: the RTX 3080 will absolutely batter any modern budget graphics card with basically zero difficulty. This does come at a cost, however, and that is the power consumption, because in our testing today, the RTX 4080, it's not a 4080, I wish it was a 4080, but anyways, the 3080 drawed about 320 watts, which is quite a lot of power, especially compared to something like a 4060 Ti. But for this, you are getting an extra 2GB of faster VRAM as it's GDDR6X, and you don't have some poxy measly 128-bit memory bus, so you got a lot more memory bandwidth there. And I think most of us would wager the 3080's got a lot more compute performance in both rasterization and ray tracing, and to be honest, I don't really think that's up for debate, because the 3080 is still quite a powerful graphics card. But if you want to see how we built the PC which we used for testing today, you can watch that in a video up there. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.